Josie, hi. Thank you so much for taking the time and coming and speaking with me. We've worked together in the past, and it's been a hot minute since we've crossed paths, but I have been following your journey since the time that I knew you back in the days at Zynga to a little startup that we worked on together. So I'm really excited to speak with you.
Yeah, it's great to speak with you too and get to catch up.
Yeah. Today, you're a senior product engineering director at Tile. You've worked at companies like Zynga and Apple. So tell me a little bit about your professional journey. So from your first break to making it all the way to Tile, what's
Yeah,
that been like?
I started at a small dot-com startup and worked there for a couple years until I got laid off right around the crash. And one of my friends was working at Sun at the time, and their web team needed somebody to come in. And so I joined and actually worked on the Java download infrastructure. Back in the day, and back when it was just Sun on the old Santa Clara campus, which is
Oh,
now
yeah.
Oracle. And then after working at Sun for a while, I started getting frustrated at people asking me why I don't have an undergrad degree in computer science. And, I think, and I tell a story and I tell people, if this happened now, I wouldn't do the same thing I did back then. But this was 2003. And, there was no online universities going on here, right?
Yes.
Like there was not all this online learning. And so I said, you know what, I'm just going to go back and get a master's degree in computer science. And, I loved the experience. Don't get me wrong. I actually thought I learned a ton. However, I actually worked at NetApp 20 to 30 hours a week while we're getting my master's degree
Oh my
full
God.
time. And I do not recommend that for anybody's sanity.
Oh, that sounds intense. Yeah.
Very intense. Like I said, learned a lot, but I would totally not do it that way now. But it was nice to just kind of get people off my back of being like, why don't you have a CS degree? But I feel like people ask that less now, even though I still feel that's one of those things that I have to keep telling people, like, CS degree is not the answer.
And all be all. It so is not. I honestly, as like a person who's been on technical hiring committees now for about a part of 10 years, I almost never look at whether they have a degree or not.
Yeah.
It's so much about that interview and your experiences and what have you built? What have you done? It's
Yep.
not like your school. Yeah.
Yeah, and so got my CS degree, and then I actually went back. I stayed at NetApp for a while, worked there full time. It was working on their protection manager, which was so NetApp builds a storage
Yeah.
system, and so protection manager allowed admins to manage large amounts of their storage infrastructures. And then a bunch of people from NetApp actually went to Zynga, of all places. And so I kind of followed along and ended up working on a game called Cafe World, which happened to be one of Zynga's largest games. And so I ran the revenue pod and actually got us a couple $1 million days, which was very exciting. I then became the first engineer on the sequel to Cafe World, which was Chefville, and helped design the storage backend, which later became the central storage service for all Zynga games, which didn't get deprecated actually until a couple of years ago when they moved everything to Java. And then eventually became director of engineering of Chefville after launch and got to manage the whole 35-person game team and run live ops. I think we got up to 7 or 8 million daily active users at our peak, which was exciting. And then my mom unfortunately passed away, and so I moved back to Florida for a while, which is where we worked together for a little bit at Shiver, and then I actually ended up at American Express for a little bit as well. while I was, taking care of my dad, who was in Florida. But then after about 9 months, I decided, A, California's home, and B, my dad was doing better. So I was like, all right, I'm coming home. And, my old boss, Steve, said, hey, you can come back to Zynga. And so I said, sure, I'll come do another round at Zynga. And ended up being director of engineering for the advertising. But I wanted to really do something different and kind of explore what the other options were. And one of my friends had just gotten a job at Apple, working on Siri. And funny enough, I had actually applied for this role at Siri a few years before, right around the time my mom passed away. And I ended up saying, sorry, I have to put this whole job search on hold because I'm going to Florida. And so it was, really funny that now, like 2.5 years later, they were pretty much looking for that same role again. And, here I was, and my manager remembered me. And so ended up getting hired at Apple to run the Siri media domains. So that included Siri on Apple TV, music, which included music on the HomePod, as well as Siri Sports. And so on the Apple TV front, that was pretty exciting because we worked with all of the partners on integrating Siri search with them, and we actually Apple got a technical Emmy for that integration while I was working on it. And then on the music front, I was working on music during the development of the HomePod, and so that required collaborating with over like 30 different teams in Apple, and we built, I think, close to 35 new Siri music features for that release. And then, did a number of things on the sports side as well, and actually also started Women at Siri while I was at Siri, which is something I was, I was the first female engineering manager at Siri. And there were very few female engineers in the Siri team. And it was something that I was like, we need a community because, women at Apple was great at providing content, but it wasn't allowing people to have the real conversations that needed to happen to have change, right? Even there weren't safe spaces where people could really talk about what was really going on. And so, I started Women at Siri really as a place for that to occur. And so, I worked at Apple for a couple of years. And as I mentioned, when I left Apple, I was actually pretty frustrated with the tech industry. I actually did kind of feel like Apple was a little bit of a boys' club, at least on the Siri team, and that D&I was a little bit of lip service. I was told I can't start a mentoring program because our VP of engineering, the VP of Siri at the time didn't believe in mentoring.
It's interesting, right? When you have so many people that look like you, maybe you don't need mentors, but as women, when there's mostly people that don't look like you, it's such a vital part of our career journeys to have people that you can talk to, women that can relate to the conversations that need to be had. And let me guess, was this VP of engineering a man?
Mm-hmm.
Just saying, and I like to make sure that I kind of preface all of this with, this is not meant to be like bash all the men, because some of my greatest mentors have been men. One of them, I think we know in common Anastasios, who was CTO at Zynga for a while, and then he's the CTO at Rally and has gone to start on other things. And he's been one of my greatest advocates and critics, and he's been a wonderful mentor. But those are far and few in between that I've come across. Yep. And for me, like the women that have mentored me, that I've been able to look up to, have really helped propel my career.
I know, I'd started talking to all my friends about what I was doing, and a common colleague of ours, Steve Klinkner, who is actually currently my boss, reached out, and he said, hey, as you know, I'm the VP of engineering at Tile, and the web team could really use some help. And I was like, hey, I'm doing my thing, but living in the Bay Area is expensive. I'll happily work like 15 to 20 hours a week at Tile and work on the web team, help me pay my bills, and I'll work on my small business. So loved getting in and just starting to like work somewhere that felt normal, right? I actually,
Yeah.
the reason I say this is I literally, my first week at Tile, my first thing that I was assigned to work on was a memory leak that nobody else in the team could figure out. And I was working on debugging it, but like in the first week I didn't solve it. And like I was terrified I was gonna get fired. Like I had been in such the bad mental state after leaving Apple that like I was literally just like terrified. And then the other thing that was shocking to me was like I never got emails at like 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, what's going on? There's no email at 10. Like at Apple, if you literally like between 10 and midnight is when all the like managers got work done. And if you didn't work between those hours, you'd wake up to like 40 emails in your inbox. It was insane.
It sounds like an enterprise problem. I was working at Rally when they were very small. When I joined them, it was 100 people, and we've grown to close to 2,000, and we're part of United, and we're integrating with Optum Health. And it's a very different experience because I'm experiencing that now, where a lot of the work is happening at night because there's just so much to do during the day. And especially if you're managing teams and stuff. So I understand it's kind of catch-22, but it's not a great culture.
No. And so it was actually funny because I realized, I was like, wow, I really was not in a good mental state. Like it's funny going to like a good culture and just being like, oh wow, like this is what like healthy culture looks like.
Right.
You mean there's like people want to have lunch with you and like chat with
You
you?
have time for that?
You know what? And so I was I was contracting a Tile, but I was still like I'm doing my thing. So but actually one of the people I was working with at on the business mentoring was a public speaking coach.
Oh,
And since I was very passionate about my story and really like this whole like journey, I was like, really, I have a message. Like, I feel like I have a story I need to share. And so I started working with her on coming up with my talk. And so it was really interesting because it was September of 2018. And we had just gone to an offsite for the mentoring in LA. And it turned out that, I left there and I realized, wait, I'm not doing what I want to be doing. Like, it was one of these like terrifying, like, oh my God, I've just invested 8 months into building together a small business. And I was like, wait a second, I love technology. If I take a step back and think about it, in the last 20 years, technology impacts my life a lot more now than it did when I started this, but yet it does not address the needs of women or underrepresented minorities at all.
mm-hmm.
Voice assistants are less accurate with female voices or people with accents. Facial recognition software doesn't work as well for those with darker skin tones. The list goes on, right?
Yes.
And then there's also the statistic, which is 56% of women leave the tech industry after 10 to 20 years, and then 22% of those go and start their own small business. And I realized if I walked away, I pretty much would be a double statistic.
Yeah.
B, I'd be walking away from having the ability to actually impact the future. And so I realized, no, I'm going to come back to tech, but I'm doing it under my rules this time, and I'm working somewhere that actually has an inclusive culture. And so it was interesting because at the time, CJ, Tile CEO, had really recently joined and was asking around about why is this part-time contractor who works at Tile starting a mentoring program at my company, because I had convinced our VP of people that, hey, like, I have a whole program of how you can start a mentoring program. You literally just need to let me roll it out for you and I'll happily do it. And she like was letting me do it. I was like, yes, this is awesome. And so he's like, yeah, what are you doing and why are you doing this? And so I told him my story. And it was just like the timing was really right, because it was literally like a couple weeks after that whole weekend where I had just kind of had that like, yeah, it was just perfect timing. And I just told him, I was like, look, I really want to work somewhere that really cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion and lets me work on this stuff, not just after hours, but actually like lets me spend time on this. Mm-hmm. And he told me, he's like, look, I told my wife I wanted to turn Tile into the best place for women to work in the Valley. And so I said, all right, well, and so I decided to join full time. And so I joined as our platform engineering director and pretty much manage all of our across the company partner ecosystem integration. So things like enabling Google Homes to directly ring tiles, same thing with Amazon and Comcast, as well as actually this one's very exciting because it just got announced 2 days ago, so I can talk about this. We launched a partnership with Intel and HP, which enables all Intel-enabled laptops to behave as tiles without additional hardware.
Oh, that's wonderful. The DEI aspect of it, so I saw that pop up on my LinkedIn because you had posted something and it had changed your role, and it said like, a DEI leader as well. So talk to me a little bit about that, right? I think as women, we kind of go out the gate being like, fighting for diversity and inclusion, right? Because as it is, we're kind of starting at a disadvantage.
Yep.
Throw into that mix, you're in the Valley, which we're more diverse than most places. We haven't quite cracked that code yet. I don't think anybody has, right? I am consistently still the only woman, let alone the only brown woman, on many conference calls with leadership groups. A lot of times people mispronounce my name Priya as Prius, and they don't realize just like what a micro, I don't even know what to call it is. But how did that kind of play out for you in kind of shifting your career into focusing on DEI, continuing to work in tech, because there is still a lot of work to be done. But then you started doing a lot of speaker series. What's that been like, and what's that journey looked like for you?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, I've gone through very similar experiences to you. Well, a very common one that, I didn't even realize until somebody literally apologized to me about it. But when I was at Apple, I was the engineering manager, and I had actually a male colleague who was the project manager. But whenever the two of us would go into meetings, people always assumed I was the project manager and he was the engineering manager. And I actually had somebody, and like, it didn't even hit me until literally somebody sent me an email apologizing. And I was like, wow, how many times has that happened in the last 2 years? And it's those little things, right? It's those microaggressions.
Yeah.
And so it's why I said, you know what, obviously I care about my career. I want to do well in my career, but what's more important to me is being on a mission to keep women in tech. And if that means I end up like pissing somebody off and I don't get the job at some company because they're going to look down on me because I might say something about this, well, that's not the place for me to work, right? And so, it is hard, right? Like the statistics show that you will get discriminated against if you advocate for DEI, right? Oh, and so I know that that's a risk in my career, but I also know my mission to keep women in tech is so much more crucial than, if I get that perfect job at some company, it wouldn't be the perfect job if they didn't want me for who I am and what I advocate for.
Yeah.
And so I think it's, and so that's what really got me into really doing the public speaking. And it really started with, applying to talk at Grace Hopper, which is really my mission. And I actually was accepted and gave my talk on retaining women in tech in that was 2019. And that really is one of the things that really spawned it, just like my passion to start doing talks. And so I've been doing panels and podcasts like this. I did over 40 talks, panels, and presentations in the last 18 months. And it's really exciting to be able to advocate for this and really be somebody that people can look up to and be like, okay, I see there's somebody who looks like me or has gone through similar struggles, right?
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, and a little bit, not too much, but imposter syndrome. Tell me about that, because I got one like all the time.
Oh, so this actually is something that really recently came up for me, and it's been very fascinating. And so, when I left Apple, I felt tons of imposter syndrome. Like I literally, until the week I left, I literally thought everyone on my team thought I was doing a horrible job. And then when I actually told my team I was leaving, I had a number of people be like, you were one of the best managers I've ever had. And I was like, oh, okay. But I was going through serious imposter syndrome. And I was like, and so part of my, sabbatical and learning journey was really going through that, feeling like, okay, I can share my story up on stage, right? And so one of the things that's really fascinating about public speaking is the first time you get feedback about your talk. And so part of the whole Grace Hopper thing is you actually do get a couple months later, you get an email with an Excel spreadsheet with all of the feedback from your talk. And the feedback from my talk was pretty much very polar. I had a lot of people who were like, that was amazing, thank you so much. And I had a lot of people who were like, that's crap, why are you saying this? And I'm just like, and the first time you see something like that, you're just like, you're heartbroken. And you're like, oh my God, I am never going to talk about my story on stage ever again. Like, I can't ever speak to anybody. And then I spoke to my friend who was helping me with the talk, and she was like, all right, if you walked into a room of 100 people and started talking to them, how many of those 100 people do you think you'd get along with? Would you get along with all 100 of them and want to keep talking to them? I'm like, no, most likely not. Yeah. And she's like, okay, so why do you think your talk is going to have the same impact on everybody? And she's like, if you're pissing people off, that actually means you've really found an audience and a voice, right? Because you've also found the opposite, which is you've also found, and she's like, look at how many people actually gave you great feedback, right? And can you turn this other feedback into constructive feedback instead? And so, I think public speaking is one of those things that really does get you to dive into that imposter syndrome.
That's wonderful. Any last advice for women that are trying to break into tech?
Yes, and one of the things that's really a little bit sad right now is the most recent numbers from the McKinsey Workplace Report that says that 1 in 4 women are actually considering something that they wouldn't have done 6 months ago, which is actually leaving the workforce. Mm-hmm. And so what I encourage people is ask your partner for support. Find those companies that are supportive, that are taking the steps to really create those environments where you will be able to thrive, right? Yeah. And I think sometimes, especially if you end up being the only woman in the room, you can really end up in a place mentally where you're like, I'm stuck here, I can't get a job anywhere else, who would hire me, right? And it's like you have to get out of that mindset. And I know finding a job right now is hard, right? Especially if you're just getting, into the industry, like it is hard. And so my suggestion is, just start putting yourself out there. Start writing about what you're learning, right? Do videos if you prefer that, right? Join, open source groups and start coding, right? You never know where a connection that you've met will end up becoming a job someday. And if you come at it with a place of like, hey, I'm going to be curious and explore and really come at it from a place of service, you'll actually be surprised how that might land you the job, even if you're not explicitly searching for it.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's such good advice. And I agree, the numbers are pretty damning right now. Not just the number of women that are considering leaving the workforce, but with children being at home, how
Yep.
much that burden has fallen on mothers, and they
Yep.
have left the workforce because they don't have choices, they don't have options. Um,
Yep.
and yeah, I think it's like the second wave of the diversity and inclusion conversation. What does the world look like in times of COVID? And this isn't going away anytime soon. So,
Yep.
making it equitable. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Josie. I appreciate this so much. It was so wonderful catching up with you. And I'm excited to see what you do next, especially with all of your talks. So more power to you.
Yes, it was great getting a chance to catch up with you, and hopefully we'll get again to do it again soon.
Awesome.